Welcome back to First in Preparedness. Today we have something that's both educational and academic. Just as a disclaimer, I am not endorsed by, paid by, sponsored by, and I paid for every single one of these products out of my own pocket. Where we are going to be testing gun lubrication in a manner which I have never seen on the interwebs.
Do you kids like to use the worldwide interweb?
This is going to be a unique real-world test of a few of my favorite gun lubes. There are undoubtedly countless arguments in the gun community, whether it be caliber versus caliber, SIG versus Glock, or any just as good as, but also what lubrication is best. Today we are going to partially answer some of that question. Now, there are several ways to test lubricant, including the lubricating abrasion tester, which is of course a useful tool, but it will only tell you what the immediate lubricating properties are of a given lubricant. But what happens when your gun sits upright in a safe for a month, 2 months, maybe more? And what if you had to employ that firearm after it's been sitting? Is its lubrication still where you intended it? As soon as you store a weapon, you are fighting the forces of gravity. Over time, oil does creep according to the forces acting on it. I have tried a ton of different gun lubes over the last 2 decades, and most, if not all, have done a fine job upon initial application. But inevitably, when I go to pick up that firearm, it has a high potential of being bone dry. This is why I would like to conduct a test with a few of my favorite gun oils. In my current occupation, I am paid to both develop and run testing on certain products. So I'm going to apply some of that knowledge here to find the most effective gun lubricant, or at least what is in my current arsenal of oily goodness. Now, is this the absolute perfect condition for a test? No, but we're going to do the best that we can. Ideally, we would have identical firearms with the exact same round count and all the same materials and finishes. All of the BCGs in this test are phosphate coated and all have Carpenter 158 bolts. And of course, all the uppers are T7075 aluminum. However, there are different round counts on these weapons, so there may be a factor of tolerance and wear. Maybe in the future we will conduct this test again with more ideal conditions. Nonetheless, we are going to push forward with the test. The 4 oils that we're going to take a look at are obviously one being Lucas, which is a relatively new gun oil, but I've been very pleased with the results from my personal usage of that product. Next, we're going to try Weapon Shield, which is an interesting case because when I first apply it to the firearm, it is probably the slickest action of anything I've ever felt before. But usually in a very short amount of time, if I disassemble any sort of firearm, all the surfaces are dry. So I don't know if it's evaporating quickly or it just creeps somewhere. Next, we're going to test CLP. Of course, that being a military contract, I'd be curious to see how that goes. Next, we're going to try Pennzoil Synthetic 5W20. You know, they always say, well, can't use motor oil in a gun. Well, yeah, you can. I've used it for many years and it's been fairly successful. So that sparked my curiosity to go ahead and put that in the test as well. So with that, let's get started. So now that all rifles are cleaned up and degreased, we're going to go ahead and apply the Lucas gun lube to this Colt. We're going to add 3 drops of oil to each rail on the bolt carrier group, and then going to add some oil to the acid brush and brush it onto the lugs here. The big thing that we're going to look for is obviously, ideally, we would like to see oil on these rails after a month, and also still see some adhesion to the oil here. Now let's go ahead and reassemble the upper. I'm not going to put any oil on the charging handle right now. There's a hair. But I'm going to try to feed this bolt control group in where I'm not scraping off a whole bunch of the oil onto that. And charge it 3 times just to distribute the oil. We're now going to apply 3 drops to each rail of the BCG on the Bushmaster. This is utilizing the weapon shield oil. Next, we're going to apply the CLP. Since this doesn't have a needle oiler, we went ahead and purchased one so that we can apply the oil to the rails. Three times. And lastly, we have another Palmetto State Armory build, and of course we're going to use the motor oil on this particular bolt group. It's again got a new needle oiler, just in order to not contaminate anything. Let's go 3 times. All right.
Well, here we go, the day of reckoning. It's now been 1 month and 1 day. Unfortunately, I did not get to shoot this last night, so we're a day over 1 month. Now we're going to find out which gun oil actually stayed where it was supposed to stay when we oiled the rifles. If you remember, we stored them in an upright position just as they would be in any given safe or anything like that. But we're going to check to see if you actually had to employ that weapon now. Is there going to be lubrication? So what we're going to do first is obviously take the bolt carrier group out of the rifle and closely inspect it and see if there is any lubrication still on the rails and also possibly on the bolt lugs. After that, we're then going to take a clean patch and wipe down the inside and see if there's any oil that shows up on the patch itself. Oh, moment of truth. Let's see if this is the Lucas gun oil. If you can see this or not. There's a little bit of glistening on the rails still, so kind of held up. Little tiny bit there. I don't know if you can see it. If you look at the bolt lugs, they are fairly dry. So, did okay on the rail. You can see some oiliness there still. Now let's wipe down the inside. Now, as you can see, the inside of the rails, let's see. Let's wipe it down and see if there's anything in there. You can see just a tiny little bit of oil when I rub down the inside of the upper. So I'm guessing, I don't know, this is our control group. So at least there's some oil on the rails, a little bit of oil inside the upper. Lugs didn't do so hot. Next we have this Bushmaster, and it was lubed up with the weapon shield. So let's see if there's any oil left on it. As I stated before, I haven't had much luck with this stuff staying wet. And just a slight, tiny bit of film on this. You can see a little tiny spot of oil right here. Looks like this rail is pretty much totally dry, actually. And oddly enough, there's a lot of oil on the side of the gas key. This side looks decently slick still. The top of this one doesn't look like it. It looks dry and is collected either on top of that or evaporated away from the gas key. All right, we got our clean patch. Let's wipe down the rails on the inside. Doesn't look like there's a whole lot there, does it? If you can see this, it's actually, some of it's collected here at the bottom where the rails engage, and it's all over the back of the, over here on the back of the upper. Tiny bit of residue, not much. It did kind of what I thought it was going to do, which was dry out for the most part. Now, if you rub back here, look at my finger. If you rub back here, there's a whole bunch all over the upper. So, kind of as predicted, it didn't stay super oily or slick. Next, we have the Coyote gun, and this was lubed with break-free CLP. Okay. The bottom rail looks essentially dry. The upper rail has a little bit of lubrication up here. Most of it's gone to the gas key. This one has a tiny bit of oil residue on this rail here, and tiny little bit on this rail. But surprisingly, it's actually pretty dry. I had higher hopes for CLP. Oh well, let's wipe out the inside of the upper and see what it yields. Not seeing a whole lot on there. A little bit. Okay, last up we have the ubiquitous motor oil, Pennzoil 5W20. Well, let's see what it did. So far, the most oily was still the Lucas. I don't know. That motor oil, there is still a film on this rail. There is still, you can see little tiny spots of oil on this rail. This one a little bit dry. This one, there's some oil at the bottom. I don't know. That's a close second. The barrel lugs look a tiny bit wet still. Yeah, kind of surprising. So it looks like the Lucas and the motor oil there's a little tiny bit on there. But actually the bolt carrier group actually stayed decently lubed. The rails did all right. I don't know. I think the Lucas may have done the best so far as overall adhesion oiliness, filming properties. Well, folks, there you have it. The 1 month storage test of my favorite gun oils. Meantime, take another drink of this here bourbon. So as you saw, I would somewhat declare the winner of this test the Lucas gun oil. We saw there was still adhesion or filming on all of the rails on the BCG. Not only that, we got a fair amount on the clean patch inside of the upper. Coming in at a close second was the motor oil. Not a surprise there. The lubricating properties of that should be pretty well sorted out. As we saw, there was oil still on the rails of the BCG. I did not get a lot of it out of the upper in terms of running the clean patch along the rails there, but it was still on the bolt carrier group. Third, I would say, was CLP. I kind of was a little bit disappointed. I was expecting something a little better out of the CLP being, military contract stuff, but it dried out. And lastly, we had the weapon shield. It performed somewhat how I expected. As I stated before, when you first put it on the gun feels absolutely amazing. It's super, super slick, but as we saw, and as I've experienced in the past, it dries out, evaporates, or creeps somewhere very quickly. So I'm pretty objective when it comes to this. So with that, hopefully there's some sort of education that you got out of this. And if you would like to actually see your own favorite gun oil tested, feel free to list that in the comments. I'd be more than curious to run this test again, and I would use the Lucas oil as the control. So everything else will be compared against that, since that was pretty much the clear winner in this test. Once again, thank you for tuning in to First in Preparedness. If you do enjoy our content, feel free to like and subscribe. And as always, hit the bell to be notified when we release new content.